Hello, I'm Bob Westrope. I believe these things to be true. 1. We live in an age of abundance, where for the first time we have the means to eradicate human suffering, want, and need. 2. Our world is in unprecedented danger. Too many issues that must be dealt with simultaneously, from climate change to an all-out assault on democracy itself. 3. We have years, not decades, to prevail, to make possible a new age of wonder. 4. The root problem is a systemic global leadership insufficiency. 5. We can't rely alone on current systems and structures to address this insufficiency. It's time for big ideas. And 6. It's on us to fix it. The Boom Xers born from 1946 to 1980. We have the experience, networks, power, money, time, and most importantly, the motivation. It's our children's world. It's our legacy. Join me as I explore the big ideas needed to inspire our generation to action. Ideas offered by leading thinkers, doers, and activists, united by the understanding that we all share one very small and very fragile planet. Before we start, the Boom series of podcasts will be brought to you by several sponsors. Since Boom is intended to promote actionable, measurable, and meaningful impact, I wanted to make a statement in the acceptance of our first sponsor. That's why I invited Story Miners to be the first to support us. Looking at the 10 years we have to fix the world, each of us will undoubtedly face situations where success will depend on painting a super clear picture of the future. The possibilities each of us sees and the means to get there have to make it clearly into the hearts and minds of our friends, fellow citizens, employees, partners, and customers. If we can't make the future clear and compelling, how can we expect others to join us to achieve it? Practically every leader faces the challenge of reshaping their organizations to meet whatever tomorrow brings. They must experiment while leading at the same time. It's not easy. Story Miners understands that strategy is best expressed as the story of who you are and where you want to be next. The easier that story is to understand, the more people can see themselves in it. That means faster and longer-lasting adoption. Story Miners are masters at this, with over 1,000 assignments, over 20 years, in 24 countries as evidence. To learn more about Story Miners, see the link at the bottom of this podcast. Let's get started. It happened in the 21st century. As I write this, just yesterday in fact, in Ukraine, February 25th, 2022. On Snake Island, a 40-acre strategic outpost of Ukraine, approximately 300 kilometers west of Crimea, in the Black Sea. The 13 Ukrainian defenders of the island were approached by what Vladimir Putin has called their brothers, in the form of a Russian naval warship that in turn demanded their immediate surrender. Pausing for just a moment, where in the background a soldier is heard to whisper, "Well, this is it," the Ukrainian commander responded, "Russian warship, go fuck yourself." Moments later, all were killed in the subsequent assault. In the 21st century, in Europe, yesterday. It's simply incomprehensible, sad, clearly courageous, beyond infuriating, profoundly unnerving. Again and yet still, Russia is an existential threat to the international order. With Putin's spittle-flecked pre-dawn rant just minutes before the first rockets fell, making it clear that his real target was democracy. From that moment, one thing at least is certain. The so-called normal world, already ravaged and reshaped by COVID, is now beyond returning. A new world faces us. Like so many of my generation, this contest with Russia is both personal and generational. Fortunately, unlike so many of my boomer fellows, my experience was modest, remote, and yet, in its way, impactful. Of course, I remember the duck and cover drills of the early 1960s, where, as trusting 5-year-olds, we were told that our desks could save our lives when we saw the flash of a nuclear fireball, the first admonition being not to look at the fireball for the certainty of being blinded. In 1974, as a high school student and also a lowly corporal in the Canadian militia, our equivalent of the Army Reserve, I was excited to be selected to go on a 2-week school trip to Moscow. My excitement was tempered by being called into the armory to meet with a military intelligence officer who advised me matter-of-factly that it was a certainty that I would be the subject of special attention by our Soviet hosts, that my room and telephone would be bugged, that I would be followed, and that I would almost certainly be approached to determine if I might be a prospective asset of the KGB. I recall feeling both frightened and excited, as with what I thought was some considerable elan, I offered to take notes for our side, an offer that was laughingly rejected by the officer. In the end, it proved irrelevant as the trip was canceled. In 1980, now an undergraduate student taking what today would be called strategic studies, I recall the angst-laden drama, not unlike of today, of watching as Soviet Russia invaded Afghanistan and threatened to do the same to a Poland destabilized by the pro-democracy solidarity movement. The difference between then and now is that Russia and its Warsaw Pact subjugates then fielded 6 million personnel, comprised of 250 divisions, 61,000 tanks, 13,000 aircraft, 290 submarines, and amazingly, 30,000 nuclear weapons, in almost all cases numerically superior, but thankfully qualitatively inferior to NATO. I recall, too, writing in an essay something that has stuck across all of these years. That is, that to understand the USSR's quest for hegemony had nothing to do with communism, but rather it was to deeply, profoundly understand the trauma of Russia's history. I, along with most in the West, was elated when the wall came down in 1989, when Yeltsin stood atop a tank outside the Russian Duma, quote-unquote, saving Russia's democracy in 1991, and especially when Francis Fukuyama heralded that we were all now standing at the foot of the, quote, end of history, unquote. But not everyone was celebrating, infamously declaring that, quote, the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century, unquote. KGB spawn Vladimir Putin said about the reconstitution of Russia as the exemplar and nexus of 21st century kleptocracy. One thing Putin has done that might be considered positive is to bring into the open the very active war being waged on democracy, in which he is one of the leading, but not the only generals. He is the principal and most expert agitator of a cohort bound by the adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Moreover, they are not bound by ideology or ideals, but by an Orwellian quest for naked power and the wealth and control that power brings. Their North Star is found in the perceived glories of the past, the wondrous, inclusive future that today appears possible to so many of us terrifies them. A purposeful assault on the institutions and peoples of civil society is clearly underway, with the power and resources of nation-states and too many of the world's ultra-wealthy propelling it. And I posit, they are winning. There are few who are more intimately familiar with this hydra and the threat it presents than New York-based Olga Lautman, my guest today. A non-resident senior fellow with the Center for European Policy Analysis, Olga specializes in researching Russian organized crime, Russian elites, and Russian hybrid warfare, and the Gordian web that connects all three. Olga was lead researcher for Malcolm Nance's best-selling book, The Plot to Betray America: How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. And for Craig Unger's American Compromat: How the KGB Cultivated Donald Trump and Related Tales of Sex, Greed, Power, and Treachery. And Unger's House of Trump, House of Putin: The Untold Story of Donald Trump and the Russian Mafia. Both bestsellers. Olga is, as I write this, also a frequent commentator on BBC World News with regard to the crisis in Ukraine. So, what's your big idea?
My big idea is we need to find tools and use them in order to fight Russia's information warfare. They have a hybrid playbook, which consists of many different strategies and tactics, from cyber attacks to economic capture, political capture. But one of the ones that are affecting all of us, regardless where you are, is their information warfare, their division campaigns, and their disinformation campaigns. And they have become successful at weaponizing social media, weaponizing our own media by putting so many narratives that even our own journalists who aren't, aware of the region they're covering or the backstory of what is happening, that they end up repeating Kremlin talking points. And I think we need to really gain a foothold, both United States, Canada, Europe. We have to figure out a way how to fight this warfare that Russia has launched on us. I mean, it's a very old tactic going back to KGB days.
Can you talk a bit more about that then? So, I mean, a lot of people won't be familiar with the term hybrid warfare, so maybe a primer would be really helpful.
So, hybrid warfare is basically anything that Russia deploys under the threshold of kinetic warfare, where there's actual conventional war. Hybrid warfare includes cyber attacks, which we have all seen, whether it be, them attacking our infrastructure, the Colonial Pipeline last year in United States, banks, social media, hacking, economic capture, which is basically what we're seeing right now with Germany, where they create reliance on them. So when it comes to responding back to Russia, the country is so reliant that they cannot fully respond, or, they have their own interest at stake. Political capture, again, what we see with Germany, with Schroeder, who is in charge of this, infamous Nord Stream 2 pipeline that is at the center of everyone's attention. He was a former chancellor, and, Russia co opted him a while ago. And now they use him to basically conduct their warfare through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is warfare. It is a weapon that they have they've weaponized energy. Even though the Nord Stream 2 pipeline isn't operational yet, we saw over last fall, as Europe was going into winter, how they cut supplies, causing prices to shoot through the roof. And it was basically lining up for what we're seeing today with Ukraine and Russia on the verge of a full-scale invasion, or at least some kind of another incursion, because they invaded Ukraine in 2014. And then you have the disinformation operations, and that is basically just putting disinformation out into the information space. And it could be anything. I mean, we've seen it with protests. I remember in Portland when they had protests, they were circulating a video that basically showed protesters burning a police officer. That video circulated so quick because Russia has control of excellent algorithm tools and bots and trolls who help amplify their message. It circulated so quick. And that's dangerous because any police officer outside of Portland who might see this on their social media might say, oh my God, they're burning police Meanwhile, that video was from Guadalajara, Mexico, from a few years before. So
Hmm.
they use social media to spread disinformation. We're seeing it right now surrounding Ukraine. And we see it with everything, with COVID. I mean, the pandemic, they have used weaponized social media to cause all these divisions to the point that there are truckers that were blocking, the main roadways into U.S. Delivery routes because of vaccine mandates, to the mass burnings we're seeing across the world, to, it started, they latched on to COVID very early on at the beginning of the pandemic. And I mean, their first operation was a reopen protest.
Hmm.
So they caused all these disinformation, and it kind of falls into division campaigns because right now, if you look in the West, we are the most divided that we've ever been. I mean, right now, families are divided, families are split, and you see this division where it's like people just have this hatred that's built up, like, because it's basically they're cultivating these people online, putting like-minded.
It's certainly amplified by the Russians. When you and I were talking in the pre-brief a few days ago, I thought an interesting point was that this isn't being executed from a position of strength. Russia is using asymmetric strategies and tactics, really because they're coming at this from a position of weakness. In almost every regard, they're going backwards by almost every measure. Their economy is what's smaller than Canada, is a little larger than Texas, which to me, in some respects, makes this all the more concerning because of Putin having so many, in a sense, domestic issues. And as much as if he fails, that's a real problem for him. Unlike, in a sense, even in the Cold War, we were dealing with a country that thought it was at least working from a stronger hand than perhaps it had, but they were fairly confident. Whereas in this case, I'm probably more concerned about dealing with an actor approaching this from a sense, at the end of the day, from insecurity.
I absolutely agree. And it's insecurity, and there's no ideology because, with the Soviet Union, the ideology is what drove their actions. Whereas here, it's Putin's desire to hold on power. And even more so now, his desire to build his legacy. And this is why we see, what's happening today with Ukraine, with Belarus, the threat to Moldova, the threat to the Baltics, because he wants to leave behind a legacy. It is a very important thing for him. He's been in power 20 years. He has nothing to show for it. Yes, personally, he has a few $100 billion, but he can't publicly state that. That is all hidden through shell companies and his money people who move it around. So he has nothing to show for it. And you're right, the economy is horrible. The conditions there are horrible. The infrastructure is collapsing. The COVID has wiped out any gains to the economy, and even with the death toll. I mean, they're lying about the death toll, but the death toll unofficially is way over 1 million people. So it is a big concern because they are acting like a rogue
Hmm.
actor. And I mean, it's more dangerous because people in the West think of Putin as, like we use our own Western values and thoughts in order to analyze the situation. So I hear like a lot, even with this impending war, that, oh, Putin's going to have to explain all the body bags going back to Russia. Putin doesn't care about body bags, and Russians will never know because of what they deploy into the West. They're, doing this domestically. People aren't going to know the real number. There's going to be so much disinformation surrounding it, so many fake videos surrounding what's happening. And there, you can't ask. So if your son dies, I mean, you make one wave and you'll get banned from being even able to visit his gravesite.
Yeah, kind of shades of the Chinese social credit program. Um, if When you're at a cocktail party these days, although we none of us do that anymore because of
Yeah,
COVID,
Zoom
but
cocktail.
if you imagine yourself at a yeah, when you're at a Zoom cocktail and people are kind of doing the oh what aboutism, or you're paranoid. What's the one? Is there a factoid or piece of information that, you think people really need to know right now that they probably don't?
Well, I mean, my most important is that they really, really need to pay attention to, because so many people spend their time on social media, they absorb this disinformation, and they really, really need to somehow go back to critical thinking and verifying before mentally turning it into a fact and then physically repeating it like as fact. And that is one of my biggest concerns. And we see with everyone. I mean, we've discussed even with COVID how people who are educated are repeating disinformation. So people have to be very, very mindful of disinformation, because this is the one area, whereas granted, cyber attacks obviously is not going to touch everyone, or maybe touches someone for, temporarily, if you have a power outage or a phone outage or a social media outage. Economic capture doesn't really affect us. It does affect us in the bigger scheme of things, but it's not affecting us. We can't see it. The disinformation we are seeing and absorbing all day long. I mean, this is all day. People open their Facebook, their Twitter, their Instagram, their TikTok, and their chances are, out of 10 things that appear, probably 6 or 7 of them are disinformation. Estonia did a great job because, they have Russia as a neighbor from hell too. And they've gone through cyber attacks and whatnot. They had a plan where they started educating people on how to spot disinformation, how to verify, what are the patterns. And this is something I think the rest of us really need to learn, because it becomes dangerous, and it does go from something you see online to truckers blocking the main routes of delivery routes and disrupting economies.
Something that really registers certainly is, here in Canada, there was a complacency about, well, that's an American phenomena, that's not a Canadian phenomenon. And we're seeing very quickly amplified the same division that you're talking about. And in a sense, what I have found, again, so concerning is I had assumed so many of the people that I've worked with over the last 30 years more or less agreed with sort of my sense of a reality. And this exercise has been troubling in finding out just how many people actually don't share in sort of that common, in a sense, definition of democracy. And that just this morning, I watched on LinkedIn an article being circulated by some people that I, have had a lot of respect for in the past. And as you're suggesting, I actually looked at the source of the media, like, where's this coming from? And it's really hard to call it anything close to credible media. I mean, and so what really, well-educated and certainly well-intentioned people are circulating amongst themselves and getting all angst up about, to me, was a borderline bogus media. And something that would be really hard to imagine being able to be describe themselves as credible journalists.
And that's the problem, because I mean, it's circulated through media articles. Look, we all remember, growing up and having like 5 TV stations. And then you had your nightly news. Information was way more controlled. Whereas now you have disinformation floating through media, and again, not media, not mainstream media, even though they even fall victim to this. But I mean, there are probably tens of thousands of outlets. You can literally go online, create an outlet, and just start spreading disinformation. And if it's in line with the Kremlin, they'll quickly pick it up and make sure that that article is amplified. And that is, like I said, a very, very big problem, because it touches every single one of us. We see it, we feel it, our emotions are invoked over this, and Russia does everything in order to target your emotions. There's, no coincidence that when they stage false flag operations that they use hospitals and children and schools, because they want to get that emotion from you. They want you to operate from emotion instead of from critical thinking and from actually trying to evaluate the situation, because it's easier to get someone's emotions. That happens instantly. You see a school bombed, you're like, oh my God, Whereas then if you actually sat down to look at what happened, you might actually say, well, this doesn't make sense. That doesn't work. This timeline doesn't work. And you can kind of start processing it. But they do it very easy, very quick. And the sad part is it's like cancer. It spreads through the military, spreads through every single household. I mean, spreads through government, spreads through everything. And this is one area, like more so. I mean, cybersecurity, I think, is number two, because we need to have our lights on. But I think this is the one area that I am like, we don't even know how to gain control of it. And I'll just show you the importance of information warfare. Even though we're not going to prevent an attack by Russia on Ukraine, because I mean, this was planned. This is part of Russia's strategy. They've been planning it the past year, and regardless if we went through 10,000 negotiations, I mean, this is something they've been putting into place over the past year. But Russia has always held the narrative, whether it be the MH17, whether it be what's happening in Syria, Libya, you name it, they hold the narrative. And they always control the narrative, and they control what they want people to see. Here, United States finally decided to play at their game. And again, it's not going to prevent the attack, but it was extremely skillful of how they took the information and for the first time put Russia on defense. Because Russia always has the smooth messaging, their smooth propaganda talking points. And here, the fact that our intelligence agencies, which, by the way, is nothing, all the intelligence they're revealing is actually online on open source for anyone who's following the situation
Hmm.
closely. But because they were revealing it and it became official instead of holding on to it, it threw Russia off. So they say, oh, Russia's preparing false flags. We all know Russia does this. They did it in Crimea in 2014. They do it in Syria and Libya and so forth. But here they,
Well, starting with the
well,
apartment
yes,
bombings and blaming it on the Chechens.
absolutely. There
Yes.
you go.
Yeah.
That's how Putin
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
power, by
Yeah.
blowing up his own citizens, 317, in order to cause a false flag and go into the war with the Chechens. But for the first time, they're now on defense because they don't know how to respond. And now they have to go and work around their narrative. And it shows you that it does work. And this is where we have to educate citizens on what disinformation looks like, how to verify, not to just quickly spread. People are so quick retweet or because it's sensationalistic, but they have to stop, think, process, see, if this real, is this not real? If they do want to share it, say, this is unverified, it's skeptical, but it should be documented. Because I share Russia's chatter and disinformation, but I do it in order to document, to show patterns. But I say I'm doing this to document it, not that this is fact. And two, we need to have all the countries working together and start putting Russia on defense. And there's just one sampling of the past 2 months of this tango between U.S. and the Kremlin, and Russia and U.S. like basically putting out every single move that Russia's going to take, and them actually having to go back to defend themselves. I mean, that is how we need to do it, and we need to do it 10 times more.
So, at that imaginary cocktail party we were talking about earlier, what does failure look like? If you're talking to those people and they're saying, climate change is the most pressing issue, or social justice issues, or income inequality, or education, this is sort of just another of those issues that are thrown onto the pile. What do you say to those people?
I say that we're not going to solve any of the other issues until we deal with the disinformation aspect, because you cannot
Hmm.
get clear messaging on climate change, because Russia is very reliant on, that's the only thing that they produce is the energy, supply of energy. You're not going to, get messaging and strong backing for climate change until you cut out the disinformation. And they are artful, and so are, they're not the only ones. Everyone who's vested in fossil fuels is artful in making sure to kind of debunk the whole climate change thing and put it as a conspiracy, despite us seeing like wild storms now increasing like
Mm-hmm.
tenfold. The racial issue, same thing. Russia was involved, and it was documented that Russia was involved in the Ferguson riots in 2014. They were setting up pro Black Lives Matter and pro White Lives Matter protests at the same time, at the same location, in order to cause conflict. And they do this with anything, whether it be masks, guns, whatever two differing things are, they are involved in to creating disinformation. And the reason is because, this again goes back to Soviet days. The KGB's main job was to seek vulnerabilities in the West. So they will latch on to anything. Whether it be if we're arguing about lettuce, whether it be if we're arguing about masks, whatever it is that they see there's some kind of division, they will come in and amplify it to a point that you're arguing over milk and now you just don't speak with each other. And now, next thing, you want to kill each other. And this affects every single aspect of what we need to do. It's disrupting the agenda that we need to do, which is pushing the climate change, solving the racial inequalities, dealing with the social issues inside of our countries. But instead, we are very distracted. We're collapsing within instead of strengthening and trying to work together and figuring out how to solve these problems.
Right, and it's always, I think, really important to remember that certainly of any of the world leaders that we have knowledge of, Putin's the only one who cut his teeth. His formative years were in intelligence in KGB, and where he was in Germany, East Germany, when the wall collapsed, and clearly that's something that's impacted him a lot. So it's probably fairly obvious to anybody who's listened this far, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So as it is today, how optimistic are you about the state of the world that you're interested in and that you read about every day?
Not optimistic at all. We see the far right, this authoritarian movement going through Europe, going through US, and these tendencies to step away from democracy. Once autocrats take control, and we had it very close. If Trump won the election right now, we wouldn't even be talking. I'd probably be jailed. But we came very close to losing our democracy. Now, had Trump won the second term, do you really think anyone would even be focused on fixing social justice, infrastructure, anything for that matter? Because, if you look at Russia, you have Putin as the leader who hijacked all the institutions, put all his cronies into them. All the businesses are his cronies. Meanwhile, you go to a hospital and it looks like it just got bombed, like, in not just got bombed in like around World War II and has never been fixed. Because then everything else, they come into power and they want to take all the resources out of the country, profit off of them. And their main point in power is to steal money, and once that happens, they don't care about the citizens. They don't care how people feel, what people do. If anything, you saw, for instance, with Trump, and this is happening with, Orban and with several leaders, their main thing is to cause as much pain and division in a country. While people are distracted fighting, they're basically, busy siphoning resources and filling their coffers.
Right, and I think sort of to close this segment, what is again, if it's possible, perhaps more concerning, is that the Russian playbook that has been updated and significantly refined since the Soviet time. That playbook is the one that other bad actors are using now as their source of inspiration. I mean, as competent as Western intelligence agencies are, they have not, at least for a long time, functioned in any way, shape, or form as the bad actors are. Not a good thing, and not a sense, at least at this stage, for any sense of optimism. But I think that may well change because you have, I think, a really interesting call to action that you think is possible. And it's kind of overwhelming to say what can the average citizen do about all of this other than be aware. But you have a call to action that might inspire some folks. So what is it?
So basically, again, because with think tank centers and other groups who are actually focused on this, that doesn't get mainstream attention. And I mean, most people, will look at the report and like, what is this? I don't understand what hybrid warfare is. I don't understand what the threat is. What do you mean Russia's a threat? I don't get it. And the problem is going back to Soviet Union days, there was a clear enemy. And the enemy was clearly marked. We knew the Soviet Union was a threat to democracy, to our ideologies, to everything. And people understood that. So at that point, if you chose to deal with the Soviet Union, you would kind of feel like a traitor against America because there was this Cold War. Now, Russia has muddled the water so much that you have a third of the country, who is loyal to Putin. You have another percentage of the country, pretty big percentage of the country, who just doesn't understand and have an
Hmm.
opinion, any which way. They're like, okay, yeah, I think he's bad, but whatever. And then you have a small, group of people like me who are focused on it and trying to explain why he's bad and how it's affecting everyone. I remember being online, I think it was a few years ago when Chernobyl came out. And again, we all read about Chernobyl in, the textbook
The
and
TV show.
yeah, the TV
Yeah.
show. We all read about it, but it's something like, oh yeah, there was a nuclear leak and that's it. And it kind of didn't absorb. But then the TV show came out and it really, really impacted people. Like people saw what was happening, how, they used not covering it from a historical perspective of like overview, but more personal, where there are actually characters that you can get attached to show what was happening, the cover up, the damage, what happened to the people, and all the circumstances. And that, again, touched on people's emotions. Hollywood is the master of touching on people's emotions. Everyone walks in and watches a movie or a TV show. And it evokes some kind of emotion. Either you're crying in the movie theater, or you're happy, or you are wishful, for this ending. And I think that we need to partner with Hollywood so they can start producing, more movies, more series to show what the threat of Russia is. And not from a textbook case, but more from personal experiences of a family who has split up because of the division campaign that is being directed by Russia, or what it's like to have a cyber attack and then be stuck in an elevator and the fear you have and you can't reach your child. So they need to start taking Russia's hybrid warfare playbook, the damage they're causing, and this goes for any authoritarian regime. We could do the same for China, and kind of making it more relatable to people and touching on their emotions to make them understand that no, Russia is not a friend. We're not talking about the Russian people. We're talking about the Putin and his regime.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
want to destroy us. And the quicker people understand this is where the Kremlin is coming from, this is their military strategy, the better it will be that they will start reacting and actually, being participating and helping spread the message of Russia being a threat. And same thing with disinformation campaigns. I mean, if CNN has done a good thing where they had a few like clips, but they like with COVID, if they show a family who lost someone from COVID because they were sitting in rabbit holes, on Facebook listening to all the disinformation being fueled, I mean,
Hmm.
this would touch at someone, and someone would get a perspective of, oh my God, this is how bad it is. You can lose your family member and whatnot. So I think we need to take this situations, bring it more to the mainstream, and bring it in a way that it is, relatable to people, and that it can be spread wide.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that the challenge is really, I guess, to all of the sort of the principal actors in Hollywood or the entertainment space. So that's the funders, writers, producers, actors for sure. Um, to leverage the moral authority that they have in defense of what, the truth.
Yeah, the truth. They have to help get the truth. It is their citizen duty. It is their duty to humanity to do what they have, use the tools that they have, and we all have different set of skills, different tools, different reach, different contacts to help spread the truth, to show what, is happening, to educate people, and to do it. Like I said, the reason I say Hollywood is because people easily can get captured into Netflix series or HBO series or movies, and they'll kind of get a way better understanding than, taking a class in Russian disinformation or Russian hybrid warfare, and I think that Hollywood has the responsibility to do this, and they did it during World War II. I mean, we had Mickey Mouse, running around and
Hmm.
and promoting
Fighting Hitler. Yeah.
exactly. So I
Yeah.
mean, we have to go back to that, and we are in a war, even though it's a silent war. You don't see the bombs falling. The damage is 10 times more because even though you don't see the bombs falling, you see countries weakening, people splitting up, families, and just in general, the overall state. And while we are all dealing with this, our climate is like melting,
Hmm.
so we're not even able to focus on the main things.
And I think actually maybe a really important takeaway here for listeners is that there is a war. This assault, we all talk about an assault on democracy, or many of us do, but it's to your point, the Russians do see it, and other bad actors see it as, you can call it hybrid war, but or non-kinetic, but it is still it's a
It's a war.
war that democracy needs to prevail at. But it begs the question. Truth is a loaded term these days. With an irony that I think needs to be noted. Pravda, the official newspaper of the Communist Party up until 1991, meant truth. And so where's the line? Where's the line between alternative facts and non-alternative facts? I mean, actual truth.
Well, by documenting the situation that's happening. I mean, right
Hmm.
now, you have in Ukraine, Russia preparing an invasion. You have, this talk of false flag operations. And I mean, this is something they've done before, and it's a part of their playbook. But we also have Western media, and we have every single probably outlet on the planet there who send their journalists there, and their journalists are there not to have an opinion. Their journalists are there to come evaluate what's happening and report on it without
Hmm.
opinion. So I mean, this is basically what we need to do. We need to take out the our bias and just show what is fact and get back to fact, because truth can be very easily twisted. There is no coincidence. The
Hmm.
first thing any autocrat does is seize state media. First thing,
Hmm.
Belarus, the minute Russia sent in, their national guard to assist Lukashenko, first thing they did was seize state media. And at the time in Belarus, the Belarusian media employees went on strike. Russia sent their own from Moscow to report the news. We had Trump. First thing he did, his tactic falls right into the autocratic tactic, attack media. I mean, and it was attacking truth, attacking media, and it's very bold. I mean, it's not that they cover it because here, I'll give you two examples. You have Trump, for instance, who would say something one day, and then when media asked him about it, he would say, I never said this, fake news. But you can
Mhm.
go back to the prior
Yeah,
day,
exactly.
replay it, so you know that is truth because it's verifiable. It's right there. He said it. In Russia, same thing. You have, when they sent their humanitarian, whatever, peacekeepers, whatever they were, to Kazakhstan. Their main media outlet, not a conspiracy outlet, their main state media outlet, which is like a newswire, said 70 plus planes are have landed in or are being sent to Kazakhstan to assist with this peacekeeping mission. Okay. A few weeks later, we have received all 19 back of our planes. They have all returned. I'm like, same media outlet. They didn't
Mhm,
even erase the prior article of how many they sent.
mhm,
So, I mean, it is our job to verify, to use different sources. I mean, it's definitely not, when I was growing up, that you had to go to the library, pull index cards, and,
mhm.
go through a million bookshelves. Now you have the internet, you have every book, every encyclopedia, every media outlet, everything at the touch of your fingertips. So, we take that extra minute to do due diligence before spreading or repeating something. And that's it. And same thing with
Yep.
Hollywood. I mean, they know what is truth. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, he
Mhm,
is fights for climate change. He did that movie, Don't Look Up. It was on every single, like, I think everyone watched it. I saw it through social media and just everyone was commenting on it. It was a powerful movie, but it's talking about truth. We cannot
mhm,
deny that our planet is melting. We cannot deny that the water levels are rising. I mean, this is truth. It's fact.
mhm.
You can go and measure it and see the changes that are happening.
This moral authority that Hollywood has, it's not about being anti anybody. It's
No,
about being, to me, pro democracy. It's for Hollywood to understand that they have a really important, perhaps, critical role in presenting a narrative that, yes, can address all of the warts of democracy, but at the end of the day, in a competition, which this is, you can't prevail if, to the point you've made, if society crumbles or erodes. It has to be there has to be a degree of unity. There has to be a combined sense of the threat, or an agreed sense of threat. Hollywood, from the sitcoms they do to the movies they produce, they need to be unapologetically uh, pro democracy, unapologetically globalist in the humanist sense. Um, and I think what resonated with me about your point was that they don't seem to be aware, or they don't seem to admit that power that they have, and that power that they need to leverage.
absolutely. I mean, they probably have one besides regular media. They probably are second in line to having the most power. Probably no. I would say even more than media because they have
Hmm.
the reach from everyone from, young to the elderly. They can reach everyone, every single person. I mean, even, we don't want toddlers, but even, and actually, no, we do because you know what? I mean, they have educational programs for toddlers where you watch a cartoon and you're like, okay, you take this garbage, put it into the garbage can, not just fling it in to pollute the, environment. So,
Hmm.
I mean, these messages can be spread through everyone, to through every single household. And it has to be. I mean, it has to be like it's pro democracy, it's pro humanity, it's pro human rights, it's pro people, uh, being treated equal. I mean, it's all for the better of the planet and for the better of society. And this is where they have the power to do it. And in many ways, there are two things that as at least unites Americans. It's, movies and sports. And
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
And, and they can do this. And like I said, that Chernobyl, I mean, I watched it just to see the accuracy and, and to see how it is. I mean, I was crying and I was like, my goodness, and this is my country. And I was crying and I was like, oh my God, this is so evil. And, are they lying? No, they are reporting the truth. These are the facts that
Hmm.
happened during Chernobyl. So they're not
Hmm.
skewing it. They're not anything. They're just humanizing and taking an event and putting it into the set of facts into something that is relatable for the person. And then the person can say, wow, how could a government like that do this to their people? Shouldn't their number one instinct be to go and protect the people, to evacuate people, not to hide it and cover it up? And we're seeing it right now across everywhere. We're all facing the same challenge on this planet.
Now, one of the points you made in our discussion before we went on the air was a subset of the call to action to Hollywood. It's not only to be pro democracy or build faith and trust in the institutions of democracy, but to your point, you raised the issue that we need to be very careful about where the funding for entertainment comes from, just as we need to be very cautious in the realm of information. We need to be careful about where the money comes from. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, hence the problem of why Hollywood's not fully using all the resources available to them. A lot of the money comes from the Kremlin, comes from China, comes from other actors who want to push their own agenda. And if you're operating on U.S. soil, you have these values you believe in. You should not be able to take money that is basically stolen from the Russian people to push their agenda against United States, against democracy, and basically again against humanity. And that is a very clear line that needs to be created. That you cannot cross that. You can't. If you take money from El Chapo, I mean, how? And he's funding you. How accurate is your movie or reporting going to be
Actually, you
on?
just mentioned who he is.
Oh, Al Chapo's a drug lord in Mexico who is now
Right.
jailed in US. But if you take money from him, who's one of the bigger, who was one of the bigger drug distributors, I mean, is your movie going to be fighting against drugs? If you're being paid, or showing the effects of drugs and what it can do, from households to cities to
Hmm.
a country. No. So same thing with that. And with Russia, they flood a lot of money to Hollywood. They flood a lot of money. They attempt to grab a lot of our celebrities, wine and dine them. They already owned Oliver Stone, Steven Seagal, who now literally sit there and spew Kremlin propaganda against America
Hmm.
through their movies, and at the same time push disinformation, Kremlin disinformation through their movies like they did with Kazakhstan and Maidan in Ukraine with protests that came out when they wanted, when Ukraine's former president Yanukovych betrayed Ukraine last minute. He was being run by Putin. He betrayed Ukraine and said he was not going to sign papers to continue looking and exploring and joining NATO. So
Hmm.
protesters came out and they legitimately came out and said, no, we are not going back towards Russia. We are moving towards democracy. This is where we've been. This is what we want. And that's it. And then you have this Maidan that happened. And Russia used it as one of their biggest disinformation tools at the time. And shortly after invaded and annexed Crimea. But then they used Oliver Stone to write a hit piece on Maidan, on basically a whole conspiracy, how it was CIA funded and this funded. And I don't even know. I never watched it. But I saw the premise of what it was, what the talking points, because it was the same Kremlin disinformation circulating in their media and online. But we can't allow that to happen. If you are operating in California, in and have ideals that you want a better planet, that you want a safer planet, that you want your grandchildren to even have a planet, that you want injustices to be addressed and worked on so we can fix this issue. If you want all the good things of living in a democracy, then you need to support it and use the tools you have to push the message, but at the same time, not take the money from the Kremlin. And we saw yesterday, I was actually thought of you, Brad Pitt. He, for some reason, is suing Angelina Jolie, and it was something I didn't understand. The whole thing, I had all the information didn't come out, but basically, the headline was that she betrayed him and sold something. They had an interest in some company, and she sold it to a Russian oligarch. And now he's suing her because he said, "I don't want this business sold to a Russian oligarch." That is an American
Hmm.
stand. I mean, this is blood money coming from the Russian oligarch. This is money stolen from the
Hmm.
average Russian, used for operations against the West, used for,
Hmm.
a lot of.
That's actually what I like about your proposal. Of looking at Hollywood. I mean, one of our previous guests talked about trying to get at the world's major advertisers through advertising associations. I think what is appealing is as you and I discussed before. I mean, if you think about the people that make the entertainment world work, it's a pretty small number. I mean, who knows? But I would guess if the cutoff was at the top 25,000 individuals, you probably captured most of the ones that matter. And so there are 25,000 people in the democracies that if they could be persuaded and supported and influenced, you could affect real change
And patriotic.
in a short period of time. Yeah, yeah. Um, how would you imagine our Boom Xer audience responding to this? What would you like to see them do, or how should they be thinking after they've listened to your call to action?
The most important thing I think they need to do is contact the celebrity. Everybody has their favorite celebrities that they follow, they love. Send them mail. So reach out to them, reach out to their press people. Tell them this is an issue that's very important, a global issue that's very important. Use your power to do it. And like I said, Leonardo DiCaprio is a perfect example of it. He is a huge champion of climate change. He uses his power and he has influence, because then you said 25,000 people, but then if you boil it down, it's even less, because it is the celebrities
Right.
who mainly have the power. A celebrity can say, yes, I will do this. No, I will not do this. And then the project, chances are, especially high level influencers, the project will not go through, or at least won't go through in the way that they imagined it to. So I think the first thing is to get in contact with the celebrities, get in contact with their agents. Send them information. Tell them, we want you to focus on democracy. We want you to explain to people, because even in America, we have, like, this one third of the country, MAGA, who is sitting and craving for an autocracy. They celebrated, when Myanmar military took
Hmm.
over
Hmm.
and put the sitting government under house arrest. They said, yes, we need a military takeover. They don't understand what that is. They really don't understand what a military takeover is. And this is something Hollywood can be very instrumental in coming and showing them that no, you don't want the military coming in and shooting mass protest and going house through house and taking anyone who differs with their opinion, dragging them out, never to be seen
Hmm.
again. So, I mean, this is where Hollywood can make a difference in educating people, at least so they don't repeat this, because it's like, next they'll be like, yes, we want concentration camps. Meanwhile, they don't even understand what it is,
No, we're seeing so much
And
information, or so many instances of um, accusations. It's happened here in Canada where the same person is declared to be a fascist and a communist. It's just
they don't even know what a communist is.
right, 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 right. And what happens if we don't do this? So I asked you before how optimistic you are. Not to end on a negative note, but I think for sure this is a somber discussion or sober discussion, and it probably should end on that basis. Well, what if we don't really strengthen our resolve. I mean, that you're urging us to be more thoughtful about what we read and watch, but it also we're basically saying that the entertainment industry needs to do its job by inspiring some sense of unity and common purpose. If we don't do that, how do you see the next 5 or 10 years playing out?
We're just going to continue deteriorating. Look, I wake up every morning and put out the information, show what's happening. A lot of times it feels helpless. It feels like I'm like banging against a steel wall. But if I stop, then that's it. That's the goal. They want you to stop or not to participate or to ignore. You have to keep going. I mean, that's the only way. You keep going, keep going, keep going. One good thing, like to end on a more positive note, Ukrainians, they have a motto. They will fight to defend their land, which they have been doing, to improve the future of the country, not so they could see it in their lifetime, not so their children can see it, so their grandchildren can see it. So they will sacrifice their life today to leave their grandchildren the potential to have a better country. This is what we have to do. I mean, this is a hands-on effort on everything. Whatever the cause is that is, dear to your heart, you need to use to participate. And that's the whole point of democracy. And this is why we're seeing democracy teetering, because for too long, all of us, including myself, were like, oh, we have our institutions, they're safe, everything's wonderful, without realizing a democracy is people. And if people give up or just ignore or are too busy, worrying about their hair or nails or whatever else it is that is occupying their time and don't put the time to work on it, then we're gonna wake up and say, wait, what happened to our democracy? And that's it. So
And thank you for a great close. It really is to say that all of these existential issues we're dealing with from climate change on clearly are existential, but the backstory or the common thread to all of them is that they need to be mindful of the war of ideas and certainly the war of action, that all of those things are happening in the context of, and no matter what your area of interest, you need to be aware of the work and effort and resources that bad actors are putting into thwarting all of this. And so I think your warning is particularly powerful. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Here's my take on Olga's big idea and her call to action. It's impossible to write this and not note that I'm doing so while stopping every few seconds to glance at the TV news. On this, the fourth day of fighting in Ukraine, the comedian turned hero Vladimir Zelensky has rallied his people to deny the Russians what surely were their first day military objectives. The world has imposed historically crushing sanctions on Putin and his oligarchs, with the collateral victims being the very people they first robbed. And an even odder, puffier-looking Vladimir Putin has just announced that he has put his strategic rocket forces, their nuclear strike forces, on the highest level of alert. The reason? Because Western countries were saying mean things about him. Aside from being informed, I'm not sure there is much that I can or should do to help frame this particular moment in time. In the days, weeks, and months ahead, we need to trust in our current leadership to steer us through whatever transpires, to trust that we come out the other side whole and secure. But never fucking again. That a country with an economy smaller than Canada's and just barely larger than Texas can so threaten and destabilize our world, and especially the democracies within, is simply unacceptable in the 21st century. It's farcically, tragically, absurdly silly. Yesterday, on one of my favorite podcasts, one of my favorite commentators, a well-known expert on Russia, made the observation that it was really unfortunate that the United States was so divided in this time of crisis. I have to say I was stunned when he left it at that. For the one thing that Olga has made clear is that this was not a coincidence. The subtle, silent, pernicious divisions in Western society are as much an elemental part of the Russian battle plan as was the carpet bombing of Chechnya or Syria in recent years, and very likely, very soon, Kiev. Active measures, as they are collectively known, place disinformation and division campaigns at the top of the order of battle. What Putin has always pursued is war. We in the West have too often, for too long, interpreted as nothing more than autocratic mischief-making. Olga has reminded us of the many ways that Putin has waged asymmetric hybrid warfare on our democracies, marrying almost a century of experience literally writing the book on active measures with the power of peer-generated, on-demand media. And it needs to be said, unlimited financial resources. For at least a decade, Putin's proxies have been exponentially amplifying divisions that already exist in our societies, from the Brexit and Trump quote-unquote victories to the trucker protests in Canada. The efficacy of his active measures were such that it had the effect of coalescing an ecosystem of bad actors around those efforts, from Roger Stone and Steve Bannon to Viktor Orban. It's not a surprise, then, that having acknowledged the corrosive and insidious power of disinformation and division campaigns, that Olga would look to an even greater power to combat it and prevail. That is Hollywood, or more broadly, Hollywood as the short form for Western entertainment media. Olga's call to action, that is, for the entertainment media to do its part to defend the democratic principles that have allowed it to thrive and prosper, is timely and existential. Societies with divided or hollowed out souls, or with no souls at all, by definition, cannot survive. But clearly, too, the call to action is troublesome for a democratic society wherein the sense of the truths at the center of the national soul is so contested and fragile. Janice Stein, a frequently consulted professor of international security studies that I have a great deal of respect for, this afternoon declared on the CBC that we live in a new world order, that Putin's adventurism marks a return to a far more dangerous time of great power politics and conflict. Certainly, there is more than ample evidence to prove Professor Stein right, but that amounts to an admission of surrender for all of us humanist globalists who believe that our birthright includes not only the place we were born, but the world we share with all. I can't and I won't consent to that submission. If you feel likewise, consider how you might support the call to action that Olga has tabled. Do you have the time, experience, connections, and/or resources to commit yourself to a 10-year effort to reach, influence, and impact the 25,000 or so people who lead the entertainment media space, and enlist them in a fight not against autocracy, but rather for a new democracy? I have argued that we must assume that we have just 10 years to manage our way through not only the issue presented today by Olga, but all of the pressing challenges facing us, from climate change to inequality. And I have argued we have the tested roadmap to scale the solution, the civic movement needed to combat and prevail over the bad actors Olga has illuminated, while successfully addressing all the existential issues that demand our attention. That roadmap is to be found in the work of Leaders Expedition, the 4-year journey where nearly 1,000 members from over 35 countries invested 20,000 hours of their time. While the outbreak of COVID led to the suspension of that work, the Boom podcast and live streams are meant to elevate, leverage, and amplify that mission by provoking actionable discussions and challenging Boomexers, especially to facilitating the solutions that result, to use their time, expertise, connections, etc., to make possible a new age of wonder. My mission here is to find the founding investors or donors who likewise see a world of wonder as possible and within our grasp, and are willing to be the first to fund a civic movement with the scale, scope, and power needed to prevail. As you reflect on the current events in Ukraine, see through the pessimism and concern that is absolutely warranted, and look through to that world of wonder that can be, must be, made real by 2035, and reflect on what you are prepared to do about it, to assure that in 20 years, the tragedy of Ukraine can never, ever, ever be repeated and visited on any nation. It's not naive, it's not a dream, it's not a fantasy. It can be. Check out our site at boombigideas.com and check out our mission and core assumptions tabs at the top. If you're interested, click on the Lex Archive to see more information on our work at Leaders Expedition.